Hi everyone, this is audap. Let's continue our game of Iwaihime on PC.
Kurokami senpaiがいらないならみんなで涼む。襲っちゃおうか。涼むを私たち3人で愛しちゃおうかな。そして先輩のたくましいすすいっぱいに頬張ってすすり尽くしちゃうのに、スズムが干からびるまでいっぱいいっぱいめちゃくちゃに愛され
たい。我はすでに十分にすすを蓄えている。あれのすすは確かに惜しいが、お前がいらぬというならば、この者たちにくれてやってもよいのだがな。消えろ、消え
My phone must have been ringing for a while. That sound slowly brought me back, little by little.
もしもし。
遅えよ。今どこにいんだよ。待たせんじゃねえよ。とっとと来い。
すみません、将様。ちょっと体の具合が。
んなこと聞いてねえよ。いいなずけ解消されてもいいのか。あ？
それは困ります。
速攻来いよ。いつものカラオケ屋だからな。たく恥をかかせんじゃねえよったくよ。
He angrily hung up. I needed to marry that man.
けなげなことよ。そのようなゲスに未だに海外しく尽くすとは。もはやお前には不要な言い名付けであろうに。きへろ。
Perhaps the engagement was no longer necessary. After all, I suspected that it would end with me before another generation could even begin. But maybe, just maybe, I could keep holding on. So I still needed that man for that slim possibility. However, even if I didn't conclude with my generation, it could very well end with the next. But that was my duty. That was the sole reason why we were given life. It was said that the origins of Iwaihime Shrine lay in a shrine priestess who married its chief god, Roku Kamehiko no Mikoto, 1,000 years ago. Iwaihime Shrine was built to celebrate this wedding with a god, according to local history anyway. However, when considering the size of the village back then, it was hard to believe that any priestess would be stationed in a place so small. It was considered more likely they were a poor farming village, and that said shrine priestess was in fact a traveling Azusa priestess.
ムツ様、なんとお礼を申し上げたらよいやら。あのままくれていたらと思うとゾッとします。本当に助かりました。
巫女様の役に立てて嬉しいよ。おばあさんの足、早く良くなるといいね。
The old woman's leg was swollen to the point where she couldn't even stand. What's more, she developed a fever either from her wound or exhaustion. Thus she and Susanome would stay in the village until she healed. Normally, visitors would be shunned in a time of famine. However, it was a different story with the Azusa priestess involved.
村長たちは巫女様たちに雨乞いをしてもらえないかと期待してるよ。
この辺りは左でどこもだいぶひどいようですね。
雨か。さもなくば食べ物を降らしてくれると助かるんだけどね。
声が届けば必ず神は答えてくださるでしょう。
The prayers of Asusa priestesses were a legitimate business. A village as poor as this couldn't possibly afford one. So it seemed the mayor and the others were hoping they could ask for help in exchange for letting the old woman stay until she recovered.
私はババ様には到底及ばぬ、まだ修行中の身ですが、私でよければこの鈴の目、ご恩返しにぜひお力添えをさせていただきたく存じます。
それはありがたいな。村のみんなも喜ぶよ。ぜひどうか雨を降らしてもらえるように神様にお願いを頼むよ。
私にできるのは口寄せです。ですのでそれを頼むのは村の皆さんになりますが。
口寄せって？
私たちに伝わる神や霊と交信する秘術です。
Nowadays, people who'd inherited such talents were known as shamans. Long ago, there were many who wished to converse with the gods, or their departed loved ones. Thus, these women were prized for their ability to allow such beings to possess them.
すごいね。そんな術が使えるなんて。
どうでしょう。老女を背負ってあの急斜面を登ることができるお力の方が私はすごいと思います。
そうかな。
私にできることなど口寄せだけ。ムツ様のように上手にベッタをひっくり返すことなどできませぬ。
ムツの番だよ。頼むよ、ムツ。
よし、僕に任せて一発逆転しちゃうぞ。
Mitsu had been playing a game with the village children. It was a local game popular with the youth, known as beta. One took discs made of knitted rice straw the size of a child's palm, the beta in question, and threw them on the ground. It seemed it evolved from a game where you did the same, but with old broken sandals. You won by flipping over your opponent's beta with the force of your throw. It was similar to the game Menko played in 20th century Japan. Food was indeed short, and the adults were seized with fear at not knowing what would come next. But children were resilient, no matter how dark the times. Even amidst famine, they played their hearts out.
よーし、それ。
A crunching sound followed. The two betas, the one thrown and the one lying on the ground, sprung up lightly. All betas had a flip side. The side sticking up was known as the male, while the side facing the ground was known as the female. If you could reverse the positions of your opponent's beta, you won.
さっき出っ張った側だったのがへこんだ側になりましたね。
そうなれば取れたことになるんだ。
ムツは昔からベッタがすっげえうめえんだよ。
ほとんどビッチャしないもんな。
Bicha refers to when you flipped your opponent's beta, but it landed in the same position it had been in before, resulting in no points.
力加減にコツがあるんだよ。無駄に力を込めても意味ないんだ。むしろ少し軽めに打つくらいがちょうどいいんだ。
Mitsu's turn came again. Look closely, he said as he threw his beta skillfully. His opponent's beta flew up only slightly, yet it perfectly flipped over. Using too much strength would have left the result purely up to luck, like flipping a coin. However, not just anyone could imitate that throw. Thanks to that skill, Mutsu had been the best beta player in the village since he was a child.
巫女様はやらんの？ 巫女様もやろうよベッタ。
私ですか？私にもできるでしょうか？
できるよ。鈴の目様にだって簡単にできるさ。
まだ修行中の身、様などつけて呼ばれるほどではありませぬ。でも面白そうです。ぜひやらせてくださいませ。
僕のベッタを貸すよ。
ありがとうございます。ああ、これがベッタ。面白そうですね。
Suzunome's face lit up with keen curiosity, a smile befitting a maiden her age, gracing her features. Though she was a priestess, she had apparently been just another village girl as a child. She had run around hills and fields, chased rabbits, and laid on the prairie while eating fruit from trees.
これで撃てばいいのですね。
そう、どれでも好きなのを狙って打ちつけて。
力加減が肝心ですよね。これは難しい。
最初は何も考えずにやっていいと思うよ。ベッタに当てるのだって最初は慣れがいるしね。
では参ります。
With the crack, a betta sprung into the air. The children gasped in amazement. After all, Suzuneme's throw had just flipped over her opponent's betta as though it were light as a feather.
ああ、いい感じにできました。これは取れたのですか？
うん、すごいや。見事だね。
巫女様すごいや。すごいすごい。
取れたら連続してやれるんだ。だからまた鈴の目様が様はつけなくてもいいんだっけ？
はい、ムツ様。鈴の目とお呼びを。
そっちも様をやめてくれるなら僕もやめるよ。
はい。ではそのように。ムツ。
うん。だからもう一回鈴の目の番だよ。
わかりました。では再び参ります。てりゃ。
あ、巫女様すっげえ。
すごいね。またひっくり返した。僕なんか最初の頃は当てるだけでも難しかったのにな。
また行きます。そりゃ。
初心者ってものすごく運がいい時ってあるよね。うん。
またひっくり返りました。また行きます。えりゃ
巫女様すっげえすっげえ。ベッタの天才だ。
ムツって実はあんまりすごくないの？
ムツ大人だしな。ひょっとしたら大人なら誰でもうまいんじゃね？
ベッタってとっても面白いです。それにすごい簡単ですね。あれ、ムツ
Mutsu, the man hailed by the village children as a betta master, stood there pitifully as his pride was shattered to pieces.
鈴の目勝負を申し込め。
望むところです。
A thunderous crack split the air.
あ、今のビッチャですよね。ビッチャビッチャ。
力みすぎた。
では今度は私の番ですね。参ります。
Another thunderous crack followed.
巫女様すげえ。天才だ。ムツも頑張れよ。オイラたちの大将だろ。
あーい、ビッチャービッチャビッチャー。
ビッチャじゃないです。最初からメスでした。
ビッチャじゃないよ。巫 巫女様が正しいよ。
ムツ見苦しいぞ。
さあ、あと1枚ですね。これをひっくり返せば子供たちの大将ムツの誇りも粉々ですね。
このまま俺が別タの名人に上り詰めるまでの苦労を全て打ち砕く気か。
ムツ、一体いつからこの遊びがこの村だけのものと錯覚していた？
鈴の目、貴様、この遊びやり込んでいるな。
答える必要はない。
Suzunome's betta let out a sharp crack as it struck the ground, and the final betta flew high into the sky. Would Mitsu's betta flip, or would it be a bicha?
完璧な力加減、完璧な跳躍、完璧な回転。ムツ、破れたり。
この状況で勝利を確信するとは少子。どうやら鈴の目、貴様の村には伝わらなかったらしいな。ベッタ界に伝えられる究極の奥義を。
何？
All of a sudden, Mitsu caught his falling betta and threw it at Suzunome.
これぞ超絶究極非奥義、スターダストシート何がおかしい。
この地ではその技をそう呼ぶか。だが我が村では奥義なれど究極奥義にあらず。それを打ち負かす真の奥義が編み出されていたことを知れ。
Suzunome jumped high, higher than the betta sent flying up by Mitsu's stardust shot.
新神王究極絶対奥義ムツ、貴様の腐敗神話への引導、ここでくれてやるわ。食らえ、クライマックスハレーストライク。
The betta howled as it sliced through the sound barrier, and with a wham it smashed into the ground with great force, shooting clouds of dust into the air. Who was the winner? Was it Mitsu or Suzunome? The two of them landed one after another, and a few seconds later, their bettas landed on the ground for good. Only now would the result be revealed.
相打ちですか？
いや、違うね。君だけビッチャだ。
いいえ、あなたもビッチャです。
違うね。鈴の目だけがビッチャだ。
違います。ムツだけがビッチャです。
違うね。鈴の目だけがビッチャだよ。ビッチャビッチャ。
子供たちに判定してもらいましょう。勝ったのはどっちですか？
僕だよね。見てたでしょみんな。
すごすぎてよくわかんなかった。
The adult thing to do in this situation would be to call it a draw, but
鈴の目がビッチャだよ。
いいえ、ムツだけがビッチャです。
鈴の目がビッチャビッチャビッチャ。
違います。ムツです。ビッチャビッチャビッチャビッチャ。
a young man and woman were shouting bicha at each other back and forth in the village square. Villagers had gathered from a distance to see what was going on. Some were laughing, while others grinned and awkwardly looked away.
いいえ、あなたがビッチャです。このビッチャビッチャ。
そっちがビッチャだよ。ビッチャのビッチャビッチャビチャ。
若いっていいわね。ムツも年頃だし。
最近の若いもんは大胆じゃのう。
Eventually, the two of them finally realized just how foolish they were acting. They suddenly blushed and became lost for words. Not knowing what to do, they faced the villagers surrounding them and bowed. And they ran off as fast as they could. They wanted to find some hole to hide in, and would go as far as needed to find one. The pair started laughing and threw themselves onto the prairie. They looked up and watched as the sky slowly but surely changed from orange to violet. The two talked about themselves until the sun set. Susanome hadn't always been destined to be an Azusa priestess. Apparently, she was born and raised as an ordinary village girl until she was discovered by a band of Azusa priestesses and began training with them. She'd been certain she developed a fully composed personality, one completely devoted to serving those above. But as the day's events had proven, the part of her that loved playing games still remained deep down.
ありがとう、ムツ。こんなに目いっぱいはしゃいだのは本当に久しぶりです。すごい楽しかった。
僕も楽しかったよ。僕の場合はまあいつもはしゃいでいるけれど。
私の村ではベッタではなくバッタと呼んでいたのですが、まさかバッタの神の生まれ変わりとまで言われた私と腕前の白昼する人に出会えるなんて。
世の中って広いね。いろんな人がいるんだね。鈴の目が羨ましいよ。いろんな土地に旅に行って見聞を広げられるのが。
でもちょっぴり疲れます。最初の頃はいろいろと興味深くて面白かったですが、ババ様のような弱いになっても旅暮らしかと思うとちょっぴり嫌になる時もあります。荷物は重いですし、旅路も険しいし、ババ様と二人きりの旅なら気も楽ですが、年の近い巫女がもっといると、女同士だといろいろ疲れることもありまして。
あずさ巫女は荷物持ちの人足とかいないの？
裕福な方々ですと荷物持ちや用心棒の男手を連れ歩かれることもあるようです。
へえ。あずさ巫女にも裕福とか裕福じゃないとかそういうことがあるんだ。
Though known collectively as Asusa priestesses, there were in fact a wide variety of them. The most common type were groups hired by large villages to come visit them at fixed intervals. But there were also those who acted as missionaries, trying to spread the word of the gods to more backwater villages. There were also those who traveled with peddlers, as well as those who worked as women of easy virtue. Suzunome and her companion had once belonged to a large group, but being in such a large party created a lot of discord. Tired of that, Suzunome had left them, along with Granny, the woman she considered her mentor, and begun a journey with her, which resulted in her meeting Mutsu.
やはり老婆と若い女だけの旅では危ないですね。たまたまムツに助けてもらえたから良いようなものを。
そうだね。この辺りは熊や狼が出ることも多いし。
熊や狼ならまだしも もし出会っていたのが野党だったらと思うと。
それは怖いね。
ムツみたいな人が一緒にいてくれたら荷物持ちも楽になるし、いざという時も頼れるでしょうに。
いいね。僕も鈴の目についていって旅がしたいな。
Of course, they both knew it was a pipe dream. In this era, villages had to prepare food not just for themselves, but for the annual tribute too. A man in the prime of his life like Mitsu was valuable to his family. If he were gone, then it would fall upon his elderly parents to do the work in his place.
僕も旅がしたいな。
私もかつては同じ夢を思い描いておりました。
いざやってみると楽しくない？
相手次第でしょうか。気の合わない相手との旅は苦痛ですが、気の合う相手との旅だったならどれほど楽しいことなのでしょうね。
The two looked into each other's eyes. From that alone, they could tell what they were feeling, what they both wanted. However, it could never be. The old woman's leg wasn't healing quickly, so Suzunume would likely remain for a while. But eventually, she'd have to return to the road. Mitsu couldn't join her. Fate dictated that he'd have to watch her leave.
旅に戻ったらもう二度と鈴の目とは会えないのかな。
きっと必ずこの村にまた戻ってきます。
戻ってもまた旅に出ちゃうんだよね。
それがあずさみ湖のお役目ですから。私たちを求める人々はあちこちにいます。その方々を私は救済しなくてはなりません。
そうだよね。
Mitsu knew he couldn't be selfish and say that he wanted her all to himself. When she saw his face dim slightly, Susanome gave an encouraging smile.
だから旅に出ても何度出ても何度でもこの村に戻ってきます。いつの日にかムツが私と一緒に旅に出られるようになる日までずっと。
鈴の目。
The sky was painted over in the colors of night by this point. Under it, the pair's silhouettes appeared to overlap. From that day onward, the two continued their trysts, making the most of their limited time. Journeys were harsh in this era. No matter how much she promised to see him again, they knew there was no guarantee of that. Then maybe I should just stay in this village. Susanome entertained that notion many a time. But there were people counting on her. People who eagerly awaited the arrival of an Asuza priestess. And of course, there was no way she could just abandon the journey and leave her elderly companion to continue it alone. Mitsu wouldn't dare tell her he wanted her to abandon her noble mission and take her for his own either. She put his faith in their reunion and vowed not to waste a single moment of their time together. Even when the moon shone bright around them, the pair did not separate. The old woman's leg wasn't getting any better. Perhaps the strain of the long journey had caught up with her. She'd broken out into a fever and was showing no signs of recovery. It pained Susunomi's heart to know that they had brought even more mouths to feed to a starving village. Picking up on that, the village elders asked her to pray for rain.
わかりました。お引き受けさせていただきます。
ありがたや。
ただ、私のできるのは雨乞いではなく口寄せです。この地を守る産砂神を私の体に下ろすことしかできません。
ということは 六神様を。わしらは六神様と話せるちゅうのか。
つまり雨を降らせてもらえるかどうかは、僕たちが六神様の心に届くお願いができるかどうかということだね。
そうなります。でも皆様の敬う気持ちと本当に困っているという気持ちがあったなら必ず届くでしょう。
そんなことして大丈夫なのかね。
The villagers were abuzz with fear and anxiety. They were daunted by the prospect of having to speak to a being so awe-inspiring as their very own god. The mayor calmed them down. They had no other choice. Without rain, they couldn't count on the autumn harvest. But if they knew they just had to hold out until autumn, they could find hope again.
頼みますぞ、巫女様。
かしこまりました。
There was an abandoned temple near the village. Now, you may be wondering why someone would build a temple in such a remote location. Well, some distinguished monks came from the capital and mentioned that it would be the perfect spot for a temple. That's all there was to it. But right before the temple was to be completed, part of it burned down under suspicious circumstances. It seemed it hadn't been very popular. The bad luck didn't end there. At some point, the virtuous monks collapsed from illness. As a result, they departed the land, leaving only an unused temple behind. Thus, in this village, the temple was the most fitting place for divine rituals. On the night of the ritual, the villagers gathered there out of curiosity. Before long, a god would appear and speak before them. It was awe-inspiring, and yet something no one ever wished to have to resort to again. As the anxious villagers clamored around the main temple hall, Susanome began the solemn ritual. She chanted the prayer aloud to summon Roku Gamihiko no Mikoto. Next, she took out a small bow known as an Asasa Yumi, a spirit bow, and grabbed the string. Using something akin to a small pole, she strung the bow until it was taut, not like she was about to fire it, but rather like playing an instrument. The hall resounded with a shrill noise, the likes of which had never been heard before.
本当に六神様を呼び出せるんかの。
静かに。彼女の邪魔になるよ。
The whispers of the villagers died down, one after another, by that majestic sound. Before long, the air was filled with an austere presence befitting the advent of a god. Susanome, who had been putting her all into stringing the bow, suddenly lowered her head and began shaking from head to toe. Her eyes widened as she convulsed and started groaning. The villagers, fearing she might be possessed by an evil spirit, could only watch with bated breath. And then she went limp. Quietly, she slowly rose to her feet, her demeanor completely different from before. When she turned around, her expression was no longer that of the sweet young woman everyone had seen mere minutes prior. A long silence followed. No one dared speak, least of all blink or twitch. Eventually, she broke the silence.
我こそは六神彦の巫女なるぞ。ひれ伏すがよいぞ、人の子らよ。
Her intensity was not that of Susanome. There was no more doubt about it. A god now dwelled within her body.
おお、六神様。我らはお山のふもとに住まいます村の民たちでございます。
The mayor humbled himself as he informed Roku Gamohiko no Mikoto of the village's plight.
我は雨を滑る神にあらず。 雨の恵みをもたらすことはかなわぬのだ。
ああ、それでは雨は一体いつになったら。
雨雲は遠い。必ず恵みの雨は降ろうが、まだ遠い。
秋の実りはどうでしょう。
幾ばくかの実りを迎えるであろう。それをよく蓄え、大切に食い延ばしたなら、必ずや村は救われるであろう。
There would be crops in the fall. Everyone looked at each other with relief at this beacon of hope. Now that they had hope for the future, their concerns turned to the present, naturally.
しかし六神様、私たちはすでに日々の糧にも苦労しております。このままでは村人たちは次々に弱り、病に蝕まれていくことでしょう。秋まで待つことはとても難しいことです。どうかどうか我らに日々の糧をお与えください。
お前たちは我を敬い、我が山に属せの汚れを持ち込まぬよう、よく今日まで努めた。その労をねぎらうことはやぶさかではない。
何とぞお知りを。
次の満月の晩より7日間、我が眷属の鹿たちを村に使わす。その肉を村人たちに分け与えよ。さすれば秋の実りまでを食いつなぐことができるであろう。
And with those words, Suzunome's body slowly went limp until she collapsed to the ground. Roku Agame Hiko no Mikoto had vowed its charity unto the villagers. And then came the night of the full moon. The god's envoy appeared before the waiting villagers. It was a creature of legend said to live on the Forbidden Mountain, the golden deer. The villagers were rendered speechless by its heavenly appearance. The buck's antlers were strong and firm, like the branches of a great tree. Their solid gold glitter shone around the village like a scene straight out of a dream. Its eyes gleamed red like rubies, and though it was a deer, one couldn't help but kneel before its divine presence. Its fur was also golden, sparkling brilliantly with each movement of its body. It was the emissary of Roku Gamehiko no Mikoto, rumored to extend one's life by the mere sight of it. Every last villager prostrated themselves before it. Suzunome slowly walked forward and spoke to it. Before long, she turned around and conveyed its message to the villagers.
神の鹿はこう仰せられています。我が肉を剥ぎ、それを煙でいぶして蓄えよ。需要に富し我が肉は一口で飢えを癒すであろう。そして我が金色の角、我が金色の毛皮を剥ぎて金子に変えて蓄えよ。それにて食い延ばし、秋の実りを待つがよかろう。
For the next 7 days, they were visited by a new golden deer each night. Doing as they were told, the villagers smoked the meat and stored it. They presented the golden antlers and furs to nobles from the capital and managed to exchange them for vast sums of money. With those, the villagers were saved from famine and managed to keep their home alive.
そんな昔話があったんですね。
だからこの土地の古いお年寄りは絶対に鹿の肉を食べないの。尊い神様の使いだからって言ってね。 まあこの平成日本で鹿の肉なんてなかなか口にできるものじゃないけれどね。神社への通りの土産物屋さんに名物鹿まんじゅうとか鹿納豆とかいろいろ売っているけれど、食べ物に神聖な鹿の名を冠することに眉を潜めるお年寄りも少しはいるのよ。
飢饉を鹿の神様に救ってもらったことをこうしてずっと感謝し続けてるんですね。
というのは全て後世の人たちが都合よく再編集した作り話なの。
作り話？
そう、そもそもこの神社は祝い事なんてめでたい名前なんかじゃなかった。本当の名前は呪い元神社。
呪いって人を呪うの呪いですか？
そう、人を呪うの呪いと書く呪い元神社。外から人が来ることのない時代にはみんな気にしなかったそうなんだけどね。江戸時代に街道が通ることになるとマイナスイメージを気にして名前を変えようということになってね。呪い元神社の名前は似た字で縁起のいい祝い元神社に改められたの。この頃に呪い元神社の由来についての物語も改編が行われたわ。その結果が先ほど話した昔話。
改変ってことは元の話とどこかが変えられているんですか？
変えられているというよりはしょられているというべきね。飢饉が起こり神の鹿がやってきて村を救ってくれた。この後の物語がきれいにはしょられているの。
つまりさっきの昔話はあれで終わりではない。
そういうこと。神の鹿がやってきて村人たちは無事に飢饉を乗り越えた。それだけじゃ終わらなかったってことね。
お
ところでこの神社のご神体なんだけど、神様のおわす山でもなければ村を救った鹿でもない。なんだと思う？
想像もつかないです。
答えから言うと梵鐘よ。
梵鐘？
平たく言えばお寺の釣り鐘のことよ。大昔この村にあったという灰寺に放置された釣り鐘。それが祝い元神社のご神体なの。
どうしてそんなものが？
神社のパンフレットには神に感謝して人々が奉納したなんてもっともらしいことが書かれているけど、普通に考えれば辻褄が合わないわよね。
This was a shrine for worshipping the deer god known as Rokugamihiko no Mikoto, and there was a legend that said his deer saved the people from famine. But then why had the shrine been named after a curse? Why would its sacred Shintai be hanging a hanging bell from an abandoned temple? It didn't add up at all. Something was missing, just like Miss Hinagata was alluding to.
戦前の郷土史収集家が研究していたの。その人の資料を見つけるのは苦労したわ。神社の神主を代々務める黒神家は迫害と呼べるほどの圧力をかけてその研究をもみ消したのだから。
この土地の縁起の悪い伝説を蒸し返されることを好まなかったということでしょうか？
おそらくね。黒神家にとっては自称研究家などという人間の好奇にさらされ無用な注目を浴びたくなかったでしょうし。
何があったんですか？
人間の欲とそれに対する神の怒り、そしてその神の怒りすらも上回る人間のおぞましさよ。
The people were saved by the meat from the sacred deer. The capital's nobles were enamored with the golden antlers and furs and paid handsomely for them. The people managed to live modestly off of that and survive the famine. However, things didn't end there. A single bite from the deer meat cured their hunger, but man's desire knows no bounds. Once their desire for food was sated, their minds became occupied with their desire for wealth. The village elders were awed by the unimaginable riches they'd earned from trading the golden antlers and furs. What's more, the nobles had asked them, "Do you have any more?" If they brought more golden antlers and fur, they could sell them for a hefty price. The villagers had only lived modestly so far because they had no other choice. But faced with the prospect of earning a king's ransom, their greed drowned out their gratitude towards their god.
「そんなのはダメだよ。お山を侵すなんて。
あの山にはまだまだ金の鹿がおるはずじゃ。
あれだけのお山じゃ100頭はいるに違いね
え。でもお山を侵せばタタリがあるって。
タタリなんぞ怖いもんか。
そもそも六神様なんて本当におるかもわからんぞ。
んだ旅の巫女が口寄せしたらたまたま金の鹿が村に迷い込んできただけかもしれん。
It is in man's nature to look to the future over the past. Future prospects are far more important than offering thanks to that which has come and gone. Up until now, the villagers had feared and revered the mountain as Rokugamahiko no Mikoto's sacred home. Yet they'd completely forgotten their dutiful thanks and were wearing their greed on their sleeves. A picture scroll from the 17th century obtained by the aforementioned researchers told the true story. It depicted the gruesome slaughter that had unfolded on that mountain, the hunting of the golden deer. Here's some irony. What word do you get when you combine the characters for gold and deer? The answer is massacre.
兄上様、どうかお考え直しを。
Why don't we stop it there? This is audapostrophe. You've been watching Iwaihime on PC. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed watching. I will see you at the next stream.